So for the past week, we've taken the time to rip apart our 72 Nova, and we've come to the conclusion that we're gonna have to do some floor work. But it's not as simple as just cutting out pieces and welding in new ones. We gotta figure out what to save, what to keep, what makes sense for this car. Now, even though this is a 72 Nova, having the skills and knowing the fundamentals to do this job is really valuable because it can be applied to virtually any vehicle. So there's a lot of tips, techniques, and tools that we can use to make this job happen. But what makes this job really interesting is the fact that I've never done this before. This is gonna be my first time. We're gonna see if an average Joe like myself can do it, or if this should be left to the pros. My name is Trooper Max, and I'm restoring a car that's been off the road since 1977. But I've never done this before. I've taken the time to do my research, and I'm building the car of my dreams, hoping to inspire others to do the same. So we've torn down the Nova, and yes, it needs floor pans. But it doesn't need what I originally had in mind. It needs something different. After taking out the interior, we broke this down into 9 sections. And after evaluating the condition of the floor, we came to the conclusion that only 4 of the sections, the lowest points, are the ones that need to be replaced. But in my mind, I really wanted to do more than this because I actually wanted the car to last longer. Because the fact is, if we could remove this middle part here, we can access the cross members that look like this, and they run along like this. If you access these, there's a little trick you can do. You can actually put epoxy primer in the middle and then put it all back together. Basically, it's gonna last forever. If you don't remove this, you cannot do that. The thing is, on this project here, it doesn't actually make sense to remove this floor because here, it's all structurally sound, it's all beautiful silver metal. If I remove this, it's much more difficult for me to line this up, especially as someone who's never done this before. You know, it takes a little more skill. It's not that this can't be done, it just doesn't make sense. The quality here, on top and below, is too good to remove it. So we're gonna keep this, but there is something that we're gonna be able to do them. I'll show you later on what we got planned. We've got a special product for that as well. So I went online, started going shopping for some sheet metal replacement pieces. I quickly learned that the rear patch by itself costs more than the entire piece front to back. These are only 99 bucks. So I bought front to back, both sides, and I'm not gonna use the whole thing. I'm gonna, just leave the middle. We're gonna cut it out, get rid of it, and just use the piece we need. So doing a job like this, it takes a fair amount of tools and materials. So that's what I did. I got all the stuff I need. I already had the vast majority of stuff. And I even went out and got some optional stuff you don't really need. I got a bunch of different things I'm gonna try. Because the thing is, when I'm doing this myself, I'm already saving a lot of money just by doing it myself. I might as well spend extra money on equipment, tools, and materials, do it properly so it lasts longer. So a couple of crazy things I'm gonna try on this and see how it works. I don't exactly know what's gonna work or what's gonna fail, so it's all an adventure for us. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the links in the description below, so if you wanna buy these items too, you can find them as well. So this floor pan here is one giant piece from the back, and it goes all the way over here, just to before the firewall. However, the replacement pieces, they're a little bit different. So the replacement pieces don't stop over here, they actually keep going. So they go up onto the firewall. You know, the factory would go up here, this is where they would stop. And this is where the panel ends, and they use a technique known as spot welding. Spot welding is when you take 2 pieces of metal, you put one on top of the other, you drill holes in them and basically fill the holes with a weld. And this is how this whole pan is put in. It's basically spot welded all the way around the whole perimeter of this. But because it's like this and our piece is different and we actually want to use that piece that they have because it's all rusty here, we're going to have to use a different welding technique. So I'm going to have to try out a technique known as butt welding. Butt welding is when you take 2 pieces of metal, you put them together butt to butt, and you just weld them down the center. At the same time, there are no spot welds here, so we're gonna have to butt weld the majority of this job. There's only gonna be a bit of spot welds. However, doing the spot welds and removing them, there's a very specific way to do it. I've never done it before. I've got a special tool for it. We're gonna try that. I'm gonna show you what it looks like. So really the only spot welds I need to do are along the rocker panel here, but in order to access those, it's really hard to access them from below. I gotta cut these pieces out. But prior to doing that, I did have to remove a couple things because underneath you do have fuel and brake lines. So I took those parts, removed them, put them off to the side. Now they don't have to be completely removed, but in this case we're gonna be putting all new stuff, so that's why we removed it. Now one thing that's kind of in the way is unfortunately these seat belts, and we were trying to get them off in the last part, we couldn't do it. Well, I figured out a way. You grab a breaker bar, you put on your socket, and that will come off pretty easily. So the impact gun didn't work and a regular wrench didn't work, but so much leverage like this will work. This is used for lug nuts. At the same time, there's no doors on this car, so I removed the doors, took the pins out and removed the doors, and this was a crazy, difficult process. It took me like 6 hours to remove these damn things, but they're out of the way, so everything's out of the way. Now I have a clean slate to start from. have also noticed that I had to not only use the grinder, but also use a Sawzall reciprocator because I just couldn't reach all the areas with this. So we've cut the front and the back out. I didn't cut the front all the way out because obviously it's gonna go higher. But for now, I wanted to leave this because I wanted to see if we can expose this joint here, because this is where the main area of the spot welds are. This is where a lot of people would do it, and this is where I was expecting to do it. So, all right, so there's our spot weld. We can see that pretty easily. Apparently the idea is take a center punch, put it like that, give it a whomp. Or you can apparently take a drill bit and go all the way through. Now for removing spot welds, apparently there's many ways you could do it. You could just drill them out, or if you don't have that much experience, you can buy something like this. This is a spot weld cutter from Blair. It comes with a bunch of bits here, and the idea is, it comes with this, and it's got a drill bit inside, and then this part is what actually cuts the weld out. Let's see what works better. Let's try the center punch one that they recommend. It wants to dance around. Yeah, you see, it's hard to get a good hit here because I have the dashboard. So let's try this one, right in the hole. And that's it. Wow, cool. So you can actually see it penetrated the first layer. I didn't go too far because you don't want to go through both sides. So although they recommend using a center punch, it's just really hard to get a good hit under here. Plus, these are really degraded, so I'm definitely gonna drill through them all. It seems like the better way to go. Pretty cool little cutter. So earlier on I had mentioned I went under the car to check for supports, and there is one here, so this is why we couldn't cut this part out. So we gotta remove the spot welds first, and here I actually ended up using the center punch, and this time I was able to get a real good shot just because I have the room. So let's see how that works. Yeah, not a fan. Let's just drill this thing out. All right, wow. So that Blair spot weld cutter, definitely thumbs up in my book. That's pretty cool. You can actually feel it go through the first layer. Sometimes you can't feel it as much, but for the most part, you can really, you do get a feel for it. The first few were a little difficult, but now I could really feel it. And just taking my hand like this, I could already feel it start separating. I can't find all the welds here because it's hard to see, but it's already starting to come apart. So let's take this puppy apart. All right, so first method to remove this, the slow and painful way apparently, you hammer and chisel. So that takes a hell of a lot of effort. Now apparently there's a quicker way. Let's try this. Look at that. Holy crap, that's amazing. Wow, look, it's exposed the beast. Anyways, this tool that helped us out, this is an air hammer. It's a pneumatic chisel, basically, hammer type thing. You could change different types of attachments and whatnot. And this made really short work of what I had to do. That was just seconds. Wow, that's amazing. You know, the previous owner, he had sprayed this car with oil in and out, and he put it in between the seat here as well. So you can actually see it's not rusty at all. It's really all nice and silver inside. So I'm really happy the condition of all the cross members and frame rails and everything in this car. I just used a combination of different wire brushes and attachments just to get rid of the dirt, but it's not even necessary to sandblast this area because it's actually in really good shape. There is a little bit of rust here that we will work on in a little bit, but what I really wanted to show was this area here. Now I could see that where the spot welds are. I could see, you know, this piece of metal that we got to cut off. So we're gonna remove this, do the spot welds, and then we can start putting stuff back in. So the combination of the spot weld remover and the air chisel just goes so quickly. This job is just flying. I can't believe how quick it's going. So now the next crazy tool we're gonna have to be using is gonna help us out on the, basically you have all these spot welds here and they're kind of messy, so we gotta clean them up before we can put a new piece on. So what we're gonna be using is this, an air belt sander. And this is just really precise. You can really break down the welds, you can get anywhere you want, and this is gonna help us get the job done. Wow, that works so quick, and it's so nice to see it all nice and silver over here. Pretty cool, get rid of all the rust. So I'm gonna finish these. I'm also gonna do this seat bracket basically here, get everything flying, and then we're gonna clean it up a little bit. All right, that's looking really good. We're gonna strip it down a little bit more. But before we do that, you might be wondering, what's up with these pizza boxes up in the windows? Well, when you're cutting things like with a grinder and all the sparks and all the heat, it can actually distort the windows, so that's why that's up there. So I had to put that there to protect the windows. But next thing I want to do is I want to sand this down a bit more. Now I can use the wire brush and do the best I can, or I can use something with a little more horsepower. So this is a 90-degree die grinder, and it's got basically a Black Hawk stripping disc. Now it's called Black Hawk. This isn't Black Hawk, it's just a knockoff. But this is a 3-inch disc. You can get 2-inch as well. So I've never used this before, so let's see how it works stripping this stuff. We're gonna be using this a lot when we do the whole interior, but I just wanna clean it up. Let's see how it does. Versus a wire brush on a drill. Both are quite well, and I'm not sure which one I like better. I'm just gonna keep going here, stripping all this and getting ready for the next stage. All right, got the job done. That's going pretty quick. I'm pretty pleased with the tools so far. You know, the combination of the wire drill and the Black Hawk really works well. This one's a little more aggressive, but you can get in better places with the wire brush. And the using of the air chisel went really well, and at the same time, the air belt sander was really good. I had originally an 80 grit on it, and it's nice. The 80 grit's very nice for getting a good finish, but I found the 40 a little more aggressive. This is necessary. The 40 seemed to help. The only thing I'm not a huge fan of is my compressor. The compressor really seems like it's lagging. Like, it's a big compressor, but it just can't keep the air, and it just, you go for a little bit and it's empty. So that's the only issue I have. It'll get done, but it's gonna be kind of slow and painful, and that thing's super loud. All right, so that actually fits pretty close. Now, this is the part that's gonna take forever, is the marking and cutting and stuff. The one thing about this is I'm not gonna cut it the same size that it is. I'm actually going to cut it larger. And the reason I'm doing that is because I don't have the experience to get a perfect cut the first time. If I make this too small, I trash it. You know, I can't fill in 1/2 inch with welding. I just can't do that. So we're gonna make this significantly larger than we need. But this is gonna ensure that we will have success. It's just gonna take a really long time. What makes this job really difficult and makes me kind of wish I did the whole pan now at first is the fact that there's nothing to put it on. So this is floating in space. Had I done the whole piece, I could put it on the cross members and screw them down. I did screw down the end here. There's one part here, so I was able to pull it tight, and then I can cut around it. I'm gonna be able to, that's kind of the trick. You put it down and then you can cut the outside, not the new piece. But here I got a seatbelt bracket, so I can't do that. I have to go backwards. And here it's just floating in space. But what's really been helping me is these brackets over here, these little guys right here, these little clips. And they basically go on like this, and you sandwich a two-piece metal and you twist it and it compresses it, and that's how it works. You put this to your weld joint, and then you go underneath and you jam this little bar in, and then you twist it. It pulls up this little piece, hence making it be able to float in space. It's basically an extra hand. So I'm gonna keep going, and then I can get finally to the next part, which is rust proofing, because we gotta do that before we can paint. All right, so new plan. We got new problems, so new plan. We cut this piece out, and putting it on using the clamps worked really well. The fit was almost perfect right away. I haven't had to change anything. It's gonna work almost perfectly. The problem is in this area over here. Actually, there's a problem and there's a good thing. So the bad news is that the piece that would normally go in, and you'll notice I cut off the end of it. It would go here, and then it would go up the firewall. Problem is, this fits great. It's perfectly lined up there, and I can still push it down. The problem is this part here, it sticks out like at least almost 3/4 of an inch, a full inch. I would have to bend the hell out of it, and even if I do, there's gonna be gaps. It's not molded properly, and I've seen this problem on other people's cars. This metal turns out is actually in really good shape, so I'm gonna keep it. I said I'm not gonna cowboy it, but in this case I am, because stupid problems require stupid solutions. But at the end of the day, it's what's gonna work, what makes sense, and what's gonna look good. But this is different than what most people do, and some people are not gonna like this, and that's okay. To each their own, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm putting this in, and I'm gonna do my spot welds here, which is what you're supposed to do. I'm gonna do my butt weld here, which is what you're supposed to do, and another butt weld here, which is what you're also supposed to do. The fun is here. What I'm gonna be doing is actually pressing this in. I'm gonna drill holes here and make my own spot welds. And then this is actually overlapping a little bit. However, when it's all done, like this is gonna be into about here, and then this part's gonna be above a little bit. Eventually I will use seam sealer and seal it kind of the way you're supposed to. And this is gonna be under a carpet, so I really don't care. And the part that makes this really neat is the part you're gonna see is actually under the car, but come see how it looks underneath the car. It's going to look like this, and once that's all butt welded, you're not even gonna really see the seam, so it's actually a really easy way to finish this off. Under this side, it's just gonna look like this. And once it's all, sanded, primed, painted, it's gonna blend all nicely, and that's how it's supposed to be anyways. So this part is not gonna look any different. So that's a nice way to finish it. This is not a show car, it's not gonna be perfect. The other side took me almost all day to do. This side, only one shot and I pretty much got it in, so I'm super happy. This is the second full day now doing this, so I won't even get to the other side. What I wanna do is finish this. The last thing I wanna do is, tomorrow's the weekend, I'm not gonna be doing anything for 2 days. It's perfect timing to do my rust proofing. What I have to do, because there's rust here, we have to treat it, and we're gonna treat it with this product right over here. This is called ospho. Basically, you put it on and it neutralizes the rust, and it almost turns into like an etching primer. So we're gonna do that, we're gonna treat it, and you're not supposed to touch it for at least 24 hours. However, some of the experts I've seen said 72 hours, so that's good. We'll have the whole weekend. We're gonna treat any areas we're overlapping, but prior to doing any of that, I'm just gonna run over with a wire brush, get it nice and clean. All right, so we got our ospho, we got a little container to pour it in. Don't need a whole hell of a lot. We also have rubber gloves and goggles because you don't want this on your skin or your eyes. We also have these Scotch-Brite pads. We got a red one, we got a gray one. So apparently the idea is you take it and you just dip it in and you go in all the areas where there is rust. You don't want a lot, you just want to get it wet. You don't want it soaked. I don't want it dripping, I just want it on. I just want it wet. Now take this pad and you just start rubbing it. And then take a dry towel and we'll just remove the excess. And then you do it again and repeat. You just keep going until you're happy with it. And when we're done, we don't want too much left on. We don't want it pooling because it could actually flake off. This is looking really good just with this so far. And the idea is not to get rid of all the rust because you're not gonna get rid of the deep rust. The deep rust is gonna be converted into a paintable surface, into basically an etching primer. So after 24 hours, it's gonna turn black. And that's all there's to it. We're gonna keep going, we're gonna let it dry, and we're gonna come back in a couple days. Wow, look at that. So now it's been a couple days, we've left the ospho, and man, has it done a good job. In the areas where you see it's dark, it's actually been converted into a paintable surface, so anything that was deep rust is now black. So this is pretty much almost ready to go. And the cool thing about ospho is you can actually prevent flash rusting. Like if we were to strip this whole car and sand it, 24 to 48 hours, this thing's starting to rust already. That's how it works, especially with high humidity, moisture, that kind of thing, which is common where we are and most places. So if you can't paint right away, this is pretty cool. We could just leave the ospho on. So we're almost ready to do the fun part, which is painting, but before we do that, we gotta do a little bit of chemistry. We can't just start painting this stuff. It's too acidic. We have to bring down the acidity. Now what we're gonna do that is using this. We're just gonna use lacquer thinner, put some of this on anywhere the ospho was. We're just gonna wipe it down basically. And then we can move on to the next step. So we've knocked down the acidity with the lacquer thinner, and we also took our welder and just closed all the holes on the rocker panels, had made that from the pilot holes earlier on for the spot weld cutter. And the next thing we did is actually end up grinding down any areas we're going to be doing spot welds. Wherever we are going to be doing spot welds, we actually have to remove the ospho, so it might sound counterintuitive, but those areas you don't want it. So just that area, I took an air belt sander and a combination of the Blackhawk sanding disc and just knocked it down. So now those areas are prepped, it's now time for our next item, which is weld-through primer. But prior to painting anything on this project, what we're gonna be using is this. This is the Eastwood pre-painting prep. We're gonna be using this as a wax and grease remover on any type of surface we paint of any sort. So always put this on, make sure it's clean. This is what we're gonna use. Now doing a job of this scale, it's a lot of work. We really want it to last as long as possible, and we don't wanna have to revisit what we've done. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add an extra layer of security. Basically between the two pieces of metal, if you just weld them together, it will slowly rust, moisture will get in there, and it will degrade over time, which is what happened in this car. So what we can do is by utilizing today's technology, we can really extend the life of our work. So how are we gonna do that? With this. This is weld-through primer. This is expensive stuff. This is not the cheap stuff. You can use two different products. You can either use a zinc-based formula or you can use a copper-based formula. And there's different quality levels. I went with the highest quality. This is one of the most expensive ones you can get. And the reason I went through that, I'll explain the chemistry right now. So getting to the chemistry side of things, you have zinc and you have copper. And then there's two things we have to consider. We have to consider the melting point and we have to consider the boiling point. Zinc has a much lower melting and boiling point than copper. What's important about this, and was when something boils, it starts to evaporate, turns into a gas and it's gone. And now the issue with that is in order to do your weld, steel also has to be heated to a certain level. And when it gets heated to the level where it melts, that temperature is now higher than the boiling point of zinc, but it's lower than the boiling point of copper. What this means is when you're doing your weld, if you're using zinc, at that temperature, it's just boiling and it's going up to the atmosphere, it's gone. There is no zinc left in that weld. It will still be around the weld, but it won't be within that. So there is still value to it because the two areas that are overlapping are protected, but the weld isn't. The weld itself is now exposed. Whereas with the copper is just gonna meld together and the weld itself is also protected. It just makes sense to use the much better product because I don't wanna cheap out on something I don't wanna have to do 10, 15 years down the line. Once that's done, it's finished. We can always strip paint this car in the future. I don't want to have to change panels and fix spot welds. So we got our U-pull copper weld-through primer, and basically anywhere there's gonna be spot welds, two pieces of metal overlapping, that's what we're gonna add. We're not trying to get every single piece of metal, just the overlapping. Hey, check out what I just picked up behind me. I got one of the outer wheel arches and as well as the roof skin for the car. These are two other projects that we're gonna be doing. We're still waiting on the other wheel arch, about 3 weeks, and then some other parts also taking a long time. So it's really good just to order the stuff and just wait and do something else. Rather than just sitting around doing nothing, we're gonna be doing something else. So we constantly have stuff coming in. It just doesn't stop production. Prior to doing any more work in the car, what we gotta do is we gotta prepare panels just as much as the car itself. So that's what we've done. We've been working on the panels. What we have to do is basically remove all the paint around the edges so that we can butt weld properly. And anywhere there is going to be a spot weld, we have to remove it as well on both sides. So that's what we did. Now this took a really, really long time. I cannot stress how time consuming this really is. This coating, the EDP coating, is actually really hard to remove. So we had to use a combination of different tools to strip it, and basically we were using a lot of the belt sander, the Blackhawk, and as well this thing right here, the old SCT. This was actually probably the most useful tool, and I'm really saving this for the stripping portion of this project, but just using it here, I'm already super impressed. I can't wait to strip the car itself. This is going to become a real asset. So now that our patches are stripped, we're going to be putting in some holes for our spot welds, and then afterwards we're going to be doing some weld through primer, and we're actually going to also be putting on some epoxy primer for the areas where there is no welding. So first thing I'm going to do is add the spot weld holes. So in terms of spot welds, there wasn't a ton on the car, but what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be adding a lot more because I want to make this thing a lot stronger. So I'm going to be putting a significant amount of spot welds in. First thing I'm going to do is you drill a pilot hole, and then you take a larger drill bit. All right, so I'm going to be adding spot welds here and up here. I know it's kind of crazy, but that's what we're going to do. Let's just do one, see how it goes. Small one. First thing I want to do is take this pre-painting prep, Eastwood pre-painting prep, just clean everything up. Everything that's got to be, you know, painted. Take our weld through primer. Now we're almost ready to go inside the car doing our epoxy primer and then doing our welding. But before we do that, I kind of missed an area here. I wanted to go over the spot welds. I told you I was unhappy with my compressor. It was loud as hell. It takes forever to charge, and it was frustrating. So what I did is I purchased a different compressor, and if I like it, I'll show you what it is. I'm gonna test it right now with some of the tools. So I've got this. Wow, that is actually really good. You can actually hear the thing running right now. We could talk. It doesn't sound like a Duramax diesel like my last one. So in terms of noise, it's not bad. And yeah, you can't run a tool on continuously. However, even though this one's an 8 gallon, my other one is 15, I could actually run this one longer because this one charges quicker than my last one. So this one charges pretty fast, and that's really the most important thing. Yeah, I'm not gonna be able to run this continuously, but for what I need to do, I can get my job done. Let me show you what the tool is. So this is our compressor, and it's only 8 gallons. It's a little guy, but it packs one hell of a punch. You can get almost 120 PSI out of it. That one could be full, but then I'm waiting forever for it to charge, whereas this one I can keep working. Can't keep working continuously with the tools. However, you can still get the job done. And if you're not in a rush, then I think something like this is good enough. And like, listen how quiet this is. I can still have a conversation. I'm right beside it and you can still hear me. Now check this thing out. Can you hear me? This will drive you crazy. That's no bueno. This is where we're gonna go. This is pretty cool. All right, it's finally time to start welding. Our panel is in. The fitment is not perfect. We screwed the panel down to the support below to give it a nice tight fit. Used our butt welding clamps around the butt joints. Also used the car jack to initially hold up the panel and clamped in our spot weld edge as well. And we did that using these handy dandy vice clamps. Now when it comes to welding, you don't need anything crazy and spectacular. This is a base model welder, MIG unit, nothing special. It's got flux core wire in it, so you don't need the gas. I can actually run gas in this thing, but I'm just using the basic wire because that's what's available at the store, the hardware store, and I just want to use basic items, nothing fancy. The difference is with the gas will do a much better job. It'll be a much cleaner weld, it's gonna look beautiful, whereas this will have a lot of splatter, it'll be ugly. But it's gonna be just as strong. It's not gonna be any weaker, it's just not gonna be pretty, it's gonna be a lot more work and clean up. And since I'm a newbie, it's gonna be a crappy weld anyways. I'm just gonna get started. The idea is just to do little tack welds and don't stay in one area for too long because it's really thin metal. Tack it together and just keep going. Hopefully it looks okay. It's gonna be kind of a nasty weld, but it can be cleaned up with a grinder. All right, you go on the black line like this. What?
How are you doing that?
What do you mean you're not doing that?
Are you kidding me? I'm gonna catch fire.
Here, put your gloves on.
It's gonna go all my clothes.
I told you to dress up, but you didn't.
Well, I didn't think I was gonna lit myself on fire doing this.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, it's too late now.
What the hell kind of freak? No, is it gonna burn my pants?
Probably.
Well, no, I need some shit pants.
Oh. How did you feel doing that the first time?
It was terrifying. I didn't know if I was gonna burn to death or literally cut off an entire limb.
Yep. Welcome to fixing cars.
Is absolutely insane.
Okay, so things have drastically changed here, and certainly things that I hadn't planned. So we finished removing our rust, and we applied our ospho. Taking the old panel, sandwiching them together, and using that really gave us almost perfect fitment. That worked really, really well. The fitment of the first one was absolutely horrible, so we learned from our mistakes. We made sure we cut straight this time instead of curvy. This just made it much easier to have it fit almost perfectly. Because I did so much welding on the first one, it took such a long time, it was a huge waste of time and materials. It's better to get perfect fitment and just get it done and go to the next part and start welding. So we did the cutting with the vast majority with a corded grinder. This works really well. I didn't want to use a battery because they just die too quickly. The batteries overheat. And for any areas the grinder couldn't fit, end up using the 90-degree die grinder. And it worked pretty well in those areas. However, the compressor just doesn't have enough longevity with that tank size, the 8-gallon. It's not big enough to run it for a long time. I was able to do my little cuts, wait, and then do it again. So it's better to have a bigger compressor for this, but for the sake of what we're doing, it is good enough. Also ended up using a cordless reciprocator. This made it really easy to get in those areas where we couldn't reach. And in terms of cutting with the grinders, we had an accident happen that was pretty much a blessing in disguise. I actually bought these discs because I ran out of the black ones. And this disc is amazing. With one disc, I was able to cut all my floor pans, all my patches, whereas with the black ones, I had to cut 3 discs on just one part. So it really makes sense to buy one of these. This worked out really well. This is an absolute blessing in disguise. But prior to doing the next floor pan, I really had to address this firewall issue. So we ended up taking out the whole steering system, all the pedals, everything. And once we removed everything, then it was quite evident of all the holes, and we really had to address this differently. So what I had to do is actually cut it all out, remove the whole thing, and the reason I did that is because of this. So this panel is something you could buy. They actually make replacement panels, just parts of the firewall. So this is what we're gonna put in. We're gonna put this thing in first and then the floor. It makes it much easier. This way I'm not manufacturing my own pieces to fit. It's not gonna look right. Now after taking this thing apart and sitting down, I really had my first holy shih tzu moment. Looking around, I could see just how much damage there is. This is stuff we couldn't have seen because when you have floor on and you have all your trims and everything, it's really hard to see all the damage. So you really have to take everything apart, and this is the way it is. But it's better to address these things now and have it last for a long time rather than in the future have to go and revisit them. So now along with the damage to the firewall, we still have the dashboard to deal with, we still have the roof to deal with. This is actually a pretty big project, but compared to the other cars, this is still so much better than anything else we saw. So you can only imagine how much work it would be, but this is still a really big project for us. So now it's just a case of getting back to work, welding in that rear panel, stripping our new panel for the firewall, and heck, even getting my wife on the tools. I ended up getting her on the air hammer, and she just went to town on that thing. She was having a blast. It's just awesome to see somebody doing something they've never done before and learning skills that they didn't previously have. Then it was just a matter of preparing for the ospho and the epoxy primer. So for epoxy, we've done our prep work, we got our panels, we've done our masking, and we're ready to spray these things before we put them in because we're not going to have access afterwards. Once this is in, this is hidden behind the torque box, and here it's going to be between 2 pieces of metal. I'm not going to be able to access that, so I have to paint them down. At the same time, if you look behind me, there's a fender, there's some bumpers. I've masked a whole bunch of things all around the car. So I got a whole bunch of projects on the go at the same time, and the reason for that is this right here. So this is what we're gonna be using. This is our epoxy primer. This is what we're gonna be using on the car. However, there's no such thing as epoxy primer in a can that could actually remain this way. This is a 2-part solution. It's a resin with a hardener, and once this is mixed together, and there's a very specific way of doing it, if you look under here, you'll notice this has this. Once this is mixed, you got 4 days, potentially up to a week if you put in a refrigerator. Apparently, I'm not sure about that, so don't quote me on it. But the cool part about this gives you the ability to do epoxy in small areas, but at the same time, one of these cans is pretty pricey. So I'm doing my floor pans, I'm doing all this parts inside the car I gotta do. I got some bumpers, a fender. I'm gonna do everything I can, so I'm not wasting any of this because I don't need that much material. I just decided to go way above and beyond, get everything done that I need coming up, prep it all, and then paint it all at once. This is the best way to go. But what's really cool about this is this is a game changer, because epoxy primer is an amazing product, but the thing is it's messy. You know, you got the gun, you got to mix and everything. A lot of people don't feel confident doing that, and even if they do, if you're doing a small area, it's a real pain in the butt to have to do it. So this is a game changer. This is just a product online I bought, and if this works as well as I think it's going to work, it's a game changer, because you just use this, throw it away, and as long as you plan your stuff right, it's very efficient. Now for the larger areas, I am going to be using a larger epoxy. I'm going to be using, you know, gallons of this stuff. So we're going to be mixing it, using gun and everything, but that's way down the line. Right now, all I want to do is protect the panels I'm not going to wax to. And everything we're putting here, this is stuff that's not going to be visible to eye. I'm not going to be painting these panels where they're visible. All right, so let's try preparing this. What we got to do first is shake it for 2 minutes. Next, we take this cap off out of here. Flip it upside down, and you push it. The idea is you push it in there really hard, and apparently it mixes the two components together. Right, now we shake it out at 2 minutes. They actually recommend a full face mask in this case, so that's what I'm gonna do, because I use this on drywall and a lot of different projects. I've had it for years, it's awesome. Sometimes it's worth having something like this. Let's get to work. Oh, there's spiders in it. Oh, God almighty. I don't know if you can see that. There's a huge spider right there. I just put that on my face. Awesome for a guy with freaking arachnophobia. Oh my God, there's baby spiders too. Yikes. Oh God, there's also this huge, creepy ass, massive moth in there. Look at that. Okay, I just learned a new tip. Always check your mask before you put it on. 3 coats. And I end up actually cutting that one piece out, because after I saw how much rust is in between those panels, I'm not gonna have access there again. So even though there's no rust on this panel for now, I know it's gonna break down over the years, because there was no way in hell I could treat that with it where it is. So I just cut that out. I'm gonna be able to sandblast the rest of it, but at least it's treated now. I'm never gonna have to replace that panel again. The other side of this panel is totally accessible from the outside of the firewall. See, I still have a whole can left over of this stuff. Now I'm gonna go do my other projects, so I'm not wasting this material, but that'll be in the next video. But simply relying on ospho and the epoxy primer isn't quite enough to ensure that this never rusts again. So what we gotta do is we gotta add a final coat. We're gonna use this. This is the Eastwood Chassis Black. This is awesome stuff. Super durable paint that's got a satin finish. This is an extremely high quality product, and it's just gonna ensure that rust never happens in those areas again. Especially since these areas are not accessible, this is just gonna ensure that we have the longest lifespan possible with the work we've done. So there we go, floor pans are in. I'm not gonna say they're done because these still need a lot of work. Some of these welds were absolutely horrible, and my early stuff was so bad, it almost looks like a metal porcupine trying to make its way through my floor pan some areas. It's just terrible. And I ran into a lot of issues that made this happen. Now I did eventually finally get it to work, however the weld looked terrible. It took several weeks to do all the welds, and I'm gonna have a lot of work to do when it comes to the bodywork. Now I do have an idea how to fix this, however we're not gonna be doing that right now because the idea is just to get the floor pans in. So there are 5 major tips I learned doing this job. I really wish I knew ahead of time. It just would have saved me a lot of time and effort. It took me 6 weeks to do this job. It would have taken way less time had I just done these things. So the first tip is understanding the structural integrity of metal, what's good and what's bad. And holes, they're just the beginning. They don't really mean much. Remember this guy over here? We removed this off the firewall. Well, we removed it because, there's some holes, so originally I was just gonna cut it out and, this all looks good. Even if it looks good, it doesn't mean it is. The thing is, the gauge of the metal might be so low that when you start welding, it's just all gonna burn through. That was my problem on this. I started welding and all the new metal was fine, but anything old, like this transmission tunnel here, it was way too thin. So it would just burn right through. So all of a sudden it's just getting bigger and bigger and I couldn't understand it. I was playing with the settings of the welder. Did I have too much heat? So I, put the voltage all the way down and then you get these little bubbles because you don't have enough heat. It's just terrible. So that was the biggest problem. I didn't understand that. I should have done this entire floor pan. Even though it looks good and there's not many holes in many areas, the actual thickness of the metal is too thin. It's like 20 gauge in some areas, 22 gauge. It's really, really thin, even less. I don't even know, but it's like paper thin in some areas. And I didn't replace it all because I didn't see holes, and that was kind of stupid. That was my first mistake. The second mistake I made is not having a tight fit. You really want to have a perfect fit if you can. Take the time. I know it's a pain in the butt. You want to have it damn near perfect because if you have gaps, it's going to be so hard to work with. And that was one of my biggest problems. So I had gaps in some areas and so much welding because of this, welding and cutting and whatnot. Huge waste of time. However, let's say you do have a gap. That's my third tip. If you end up having a gap, what do? Well, the easiest thing is actually cut yourself a piece of metal and put it in. Even if it's really, really small, it's gonna make such a difference because if it's a big gap, it's gonna be so hard to fill with a welder. But let's say it's not that big, you don't wanna put a piece of metal, there's another thing you can do. Take yourself a piece of copper, put it behind, the copper won't melt, and then you got a surface. You're working off the copper, and all of a sudden, you can make yourself a little, you can bridge the gap. It still takes a long time, but it's much quicker. This would have saved me so much trouble. I had to do it on the firewall. I really wish I had done this on the floor pans. Honestly, I could have saved weeks. The next step is all about heat. I was mentioning I was turning down my voltage on the welder before because I didn't want to burn through the metal. The thing is, you need a certain amount of heat. I heard some experts say, if you're not getting a sunburn on your arms, if you have a t-shirt on, you're doing it wrong because it's gonna get really hot. So when I finally figured it out, way down the line, it was getting so hot, I was wearing a full jacket and everything, you need penetration of welds. With 2 new pieces of metal, I was doing that, you're getting damn near perfect welds. I'm like, finally understand what's going on. I just couldn't get it. Heat is really important. You need the penetration. You wanna see the heat going through the metal. If it's way too thin like mine, you're not gonna be able to do that. You're gonna think you're doing something wrong. So heat is important. But then I had one more problem, one of my biggest problems, and it was this. Oh man, the biggest problem on this project, I feel like no matter how much time I spend on it, I just can't get any better at welding. It just felt like a huge problem. Turns out the culprit was my welder. My welder was just given inconsistent wire speed. I wasn't able to put the recommended settings because it would just get stuck altogether. So it was coming, I was just jumping out. So what I did is I went, picked up a new welder, this guy over here, and I gotta tell you, it's like night and day. I could finally weld properly. The welds just look so much better. I really wish I had known about this before. That's the thing. I spent like 3, almost 4 weeks welding with a crappy welder, and that was the problem. Sometimes you just gotta pick up the equipment and realize if there's a problem, you can't set the wire speed properly, it's likely the welder's fault. And that's exactly what it was. So pick this guy up, I'm really happy with it. You can MIG, you can TIG, you can do flux core. So we're doing flux core, but at the same time having the fact that this could do TIG with the rod, that's pretty cool because it's a much stronger weld for like things like frames and stuff. It's a good option to have, so I'm pretty happy with this guy. Really wish I'd picked it up earlier. Really awesome welder. It got better. As they went along, if you look at all 4 sections, the first section's horrible. And as we get to the next section, it gets better and better to the point where when we got to the end, there's almost no adjustments that need to be done on the other side, just maybe a little touch up. So there are the 5 tips that really helped me out in this job. And this is unfortunately some stuff I learned down the line. I've done a couple things since this. And it's taken a while to learn. So you really have to wait and develop your skills and take the time to do this. Put the hours in and you'll learn it. And I said, I'm not an expert. This is not a channel me showing all my skills and tips and tricks, you know? I want to show you, you're going to see my crappy welds, and I'm going to show you, I'm not hiding anything. There's some god-awful work here. Later on, we're going to be fixing those things way down the line when we're going to be doing like body work and stuff like that, when we're painting this thing. So we got to fix all that work. So now I got a lot of work because of stuff I didn't know how to do. But that's the point, right? You're going to learn because of my mistakes, so you don't have to go through the crap I did, right? Now on the show, I never claimed to be expert. The idea was really just to give people confidence to try these projects on their own, to get an overview of what it'd be like. You know, I spent a lot of time, hundreds of hours watching videos, doing the research, talking to experts, getting the information needed prior to doing this, so you don't have to. And that's kind of the idea. However, we're not going to know all the answers. So in the future, as we get to parts where we can't tackle, we're going to have guests on the show help us out. So for the bigger jobs, we will have people helping us out. At the same time, there's a lot of behind the scenes people helping me out. So like on this particular job, there's so many more details. We just scratched the surface. But if you have a larger job, I really recommend checking out this channel called Carthage Classic. So Richard runs this channel. It's amazing. He does incredible projects. This is where I learned most of my information, and he's a master. So we might show the basics, but if you really want to get into the technical, aspect of it, I recommend watching that because he knows so much. He's got a lot of great information. And I mentioned several weeks back that we're going to be dealing with these cross members and how we're going to protect them. Well, the item finally arrived, so here it is. So this is it. Eastwood internal frame coating. This is what we're going to use for any sort of areas where we can't access like cross members and frame rails and whatnot. You shoot this stuff inside there and it's just going to last much longer. Since we can't treat the inside, we can't sandblast, we can't remove all the rust, we could do this. So that's what we're going to do. You just take the nozzle, you put it in the hole, and you just shoot as much as you can. And this will really help extend the life of those rails. And the next thing is this, we've learned a lot of stuff here. This was the first for us. So I got my book. I'm going to enter exactly what I learned. At the end of this, I'm going to have the whole book, show you guys exactly how many things I've learned. So we've already added our stuff in. And the final thing is this car itself. If you have not seen the story of how we got this car, this was a crazy journey. This took 13 months to get. We have a whole series. You're going to see at the end of this video in the restoration series, so you have the whole playlist there. I encourage you to watch this because this is really cool. It's really hard to find. Even though this thing was in somewhat rough shape compared to the other cars we saw, this was incredible. So I recommend you watching that. And if you haven't subscribed, you can subscribe if you want to check out what's coming next because there's a lot of stuff. So check out some of the stuff. So thanks for your support. Up next, we got 5 tips that we've done. Rather large video of things we learned along the way that are really going to help you out. It's on the end screen.